to the final portion of our program today, which we're calling Optimizing Final Filtration to Avoid Bottling Delays. And really what that means for us is just what can happen close to bottling, what can you do about it, and what are some proactive measures that you can be taking closer to bottling, because we just spent the whole morning talking about upstream decisions. So our next presentation, Daniel and I are going to talk about filterability. So first I'm going to go over testing methodology and setup, and then Daniel's going to do a demo for us. I'll steal a line from Maggie. Why is the marketing manager giving a presentation about filterability? I, like a lot of people at Scott Labs, come from a production background, and my background is in wine labs. So I have some friends from Delicato who are here today that I worked with then. So I'm, just like Maggie, a super lab nerd, and I feel really excited to give this presentation about test setup and methodology. That being said, if you yourself are not giving a filterability test or conducting the filterability test, don't worry, there's something in here for you. Just knowing the parameters of your test setup and the values that you're being given can really help you figure out what you can extrapolate from them and what you can't extrapolate from them. So yeah, we'll get started. Okay, so first I'm going to cover different types of filterability tests, and sort of intermingled with that, I'm also going to talk about our preferred method. And then Daniel's going to do the demonstration. So before we get started, how many people are testing filterability? Okay, awesome. You've made Daniel happy. So what is filterability testing? And I'm talking about what is filterability testing because we're also talking about what filterability testing is not. So filterability testing is a method for identifying wines that have the potential to be problematic during sterile filtration by fouling the membrane. Filterability testing is not a replication of the actual wine filtration at bottling, and we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. So we have the actual unit right here. You don't have to look at the picture, but this is an example of a filterability testing unit. You have your wine sample in the chamber here. You have a hose that's used to apply gas. You have your filter membrane disc here, and this version has a scale. And you'll see in our recommendations why we recommend doing that. So also important, filterability testing is not to determine what grade you should use for filtration in the cellar. So if you're selecting a media grade, that's where turbidity is your friend, but we also just scared you away from using turbidity. So that being said, okay, we have a lot of different filterability testing methods that exist. There's not a lot of consensus. So that's why I like to say it's messy out there. So these are all different methodologies that I've found online and from official laboratories, and I'm going to show a lot of different collage slides like this. Don't worry about reading every single word on them. I'm trying to get the point across that it's complicated, and there's a lot of different people who are going to tell you how to do filterability differently. So that being said, across published methods, there's quite a bit of inconsistency in setup, in measurement, and in calculations. So let's talk about how the methods differ in setup. I just pulled two from that collection of methods. And in blue, we have inconsistencies in the size of the membrane. So we have 25 millimeters versus 47 millimeters. In yellow, we have differences in the porosity of the membranes. One test is calling for 0.65 micron, and the other test is calling for 0.45 micron. And 0.65 is often supposed to be representative of the pre-filter. 0.45 represents the final filter, but we'll get more into that in a second. Pink shows the differences in the test pressure. One test is calling for 1 bar, another test is calling for 2 bar. And something that's not shown here is temperature. So a lot of different methods will call for different temperature procedures. So some will have you bring the wine into the lab and warm it up to lab temperature. Others will have you just do cellar temperature. Others will have you do the bottling temperature. So inconsistencies in test setup. So what do we recommend? Starting off with temperature, we recommend the same temperature as bottling temperature. And this is because temperature affects the solubility of colloids. And that was Lee's presentation. Traditionally at warmer temperatures, colloids can be a little bit more soluble. So they may pass through a filterability test, and then on the day of, when your wine is a lot colder, closer to your bottling temperature, it can clog your final membrane. So that's why we recommend doing the filterability test as the same temperature as your bottling temperature. For the disc size, we recommend 25 millimeter, and there is arguments for 47 millimeters. but we prefer 25 just to be conservative. So this way, like the 25 millimeter will foul more easily than a 47 millimeter. So let's be conservative. Let's find a problem in the lab that maybe isn't that bad on bottling day rather than not find a problem in the lab and have one on bottling day. Okay, for porosity, we recommend testing your final membrane, which is going to be your 0.45 micron. So the point of a filterability test is to predict what's going to foul your final membrane. And the theory for using 0.65 is, whatever would clog your pre-filter is definitely going to clog your membrane. But that's kind of a logical fallacy because stuff that can get through your pre-filter can still clog your membrane. So if you've passed filterability on your pre-filter, you are not necessarily passing filterability on your final membrane. Okay, so then in addition to porosity, these 2 points kind of relate to that porosity. You want to be using your, for your test setup, you want to be using the same material as your final membrane. So some tests, when they call for doing that 0.65, they'll use cellulose acetate, which is that like depth media, which is typically what a pre-filter is. We recommend using PES, which is the same material as your final membrane. And then we recommend getting your filterability testing discs from the same place that you buy your cartridges. So any good cartridge supplier will also have filterability testing discs for you. And the reason is because there's variability between manufacturers. So make sure you're testing your wine against the actual membrane that you're going to be using at bottling. Okay, so now let's talk about all the different measurements that are out there. So what are you measuring and when are you taking those measurements? So again, back to our collage of all the different things that people recommend. So in green, these people are measuring time. So their measurements are in time that it takes to filter a given volume. And then in blue, we have the opposite. So you're taking measurements of volume that are filtered over a given time. And spoiler alert, we recommend measuring time to filter a given volume. And frankly, a lot of this is just logistical. It's easier to conduct the test this way. You don't have to swap beakers. So for example, when the scale reads a certain amount, then you can just note the time that occurred. Versus if you're measuring volume, you'd have to pull the beaker and switch it at that time period so that you can then set it down, let it settle, and record the volume. So logistically, it's a little bit easier to conduct the test if you're measuring time rather than volume. Additionally, you don't have a risk of running out of wine because the point when you're doing the test this way is to pass the full volume of wine through the filter. When you're doing volume over time, you have a set time period and you may run out of wine before that time period is done. So again, a lot of this is just logistical. It's just easier to do this. Okay, so now assuming that you're on board with our test setup measuring time instead of volume, so how much wine are you using for your test? And when are you taking the measurements? So back to published methods, we have some that recommend measuring a total volume of 400 milliliters and some that recommend a total volume of 600 milliliters. And then when are you taking the measurements? So in orange, they have you taking measurements when 100 grams passes through the filter, 200 grams, 300 grams, and 400 grams. And then in blue, you're taking measurements at when 200 grams passes through, 400 grams passes through, and 600 grams passes through. So what do we recommend? We recommend a 600 gram sample, and we recommend measuring time to filter 200, 400, and 600. And this really has to do with the calculations that we recommend, which we're going to go over. But overall, measuring 600 instead of 400, theoretically, it's a broader measurement, and it can help illustrate membrane loading over time better than a smaller sample. Okay, so now let's talk about common filterability calculations, some of which you may be familiar with. The two main ones, again, you saw a bunch of other ones up there, but the two main ones that we encounter are filterability index, which are typically two numbers. It's filterability index and modified filterability index. And we have Vmax. So it's really important to understand what both of these things are telling you. So filterability index reports you might get filter clogging or you might not get filter clogging. That's what it's telling you. Vmax is reporting an estimated volume of wine you can pass through your filter before it clogs. And it's important to note that both of these metrics do not account for things that can either make your filtration easier or harder. So that would be your pre-filters, your condition of your filters, your rinsing and regeneration, your water quality, Maggie talked about that, and any other factors that can put stress on your setup or make your setup easier to work with. Okay, so let's talk about filterability index. And a big takeaway from this is we finally have some consensus between all these methods. So filterability has a pretty consistent calculation across published methods. And it's important to know that even when a method is telling you to calculate filterability index and modified filterability index, there's still differences in test setup, but at least the calculation is the same. So they all measure 600 grams of wine, and they measure at 200, 400, and 600. So for Vmax, let's see what's out there. Unfortunately, it's kind of messy, and the calculation is really inconsistent across methodologies. So there's inconsistency in what you're measuring across methodologies. Are you measuring time or are you measuring volume? As well as the calculation. So all three of these methods on the screen have different math. So what are we going to do if these are our two main calculations that we could be using for filterability? I think Vmax as a concept sounds pretty good. It's like the volume of wine you can pass through your filter before it clogs. It's potentially a little bit more information than that black and white, like you might have an issue, you might not have an issue. Potentially it's more actionable. You might be able to calculate how many filters you might need. Well, a little foreshadowing, it's kind of hard to use. So what makes it hard to use? First up is the calculation. So, as we mentioned, what calculation are you using? There's a bunch out there. And this means, do you know what calculation your lab is using? Do you know if you're using the same calculation over time, or have there been different calculations that have been employed? So if you are using the same calculation over time, your data may be comparatively valuable, but not necessarily as an absolute number. And that just means, like, if one number is significantly higher or lower than your traditional good numbers, that might tell you something, but what does it tell you? So why is Vmax not an absolute number? Well, we're extrapolating a lot, and that leaves a lot of room for error. So Vmax makes a lot of assumptions about 600 milliliters of wine. So it doesn't take into account your pre-filtration. So if you have a lenticular in line or you have a pre-membrane cartridge, you're going to make that filtration quite a bit easier. So that number that Vmax gave you is you're probably going to get a lot more through those cartridges. And then we also have the R2 law, which is basically Vmax uses this filter surface area of the disc, and mathematically it scales that filter surface area up to the filter surface area of a cartridge. But it doesn't necessarily take into account the exponential relationship between increasing filter surface area and improved filter surface life. So for example, you double the filter surface area, you actually increase by fourfold the filter surface life. So that being said, Vmax is not a direct measure of filterability. I hope I've convinced you of that. If not, I'm sorry. But that doesn't mean that we can't use it. So how should it be used? A lot of the time when you're calculating Vmax, you're doing the same test that you would use to calculate filterability index and modified filterability index. So it's not a completely different test, at least in our case. So you can use both numbers. So if you want to use both, we recommend using filterability index and modified filterability index to determine filterability. That's going to be your filterability number, and you'll take that as whether your wine is filterable. However, Vmax can be used for what it is, which is a very rough estimate of filter lifespan. So it can still be helpful. And as we were mentioning before in the test setup, we just prefer to be conservative. We would rather identify a problem and not have it be a problem rather than the other way around, because that's more disruptive to your production. So filterability index and modified filterability index, this is the math for that. Don't worry about writing it down. You can find it on our website. Also, I don't know why I listed T400 before T200. That's my bad. But that being said, this is also how we recommend interpreting the results. Again, This is on our website, so don't worry about writing this down. Using filterability index alone, it can be hard to get a definitive answer on whether your filtration will be good. So we kind of have two potential options here. Filterability index greater than 20, filtration problems may occur. Filterability index less than or equal to 20, no problems expected. But with modified filterability index, which is the part of the calculation that it uses that T600, which is that extended measurement, we can get a little bit more information. So yeah, comparing filterability index and modified filterability index gives a better picture of what may occur as time progresses. So again, don't worry about remembering any of these values or anything like that. You can always contact any of us later to talk more about the nerdiness of filterability. So I'm going to invite Daniel up here, and he's going to talk and show you a filterability test and then also talk about some potential results that you could see.
Awesome. How's it going, guys? Daniel Plasencia. I work with Scott Labs. I've been here for about 4 years now. I'm in the technical division. I work with Maria Peterson, and of course, all the other experts that we have here today. So yeah, talking about filterability, Ella did a great job talking about filterability. I am going to do a demonstration. Now, I did set the unit up earlier, so I'm going to kind of go back on a couple things. We recommend testing the wine at the same temperature, things like that. Unfortunately, I just wanted to be ready, so I already got the wine loaded into the chamber, and I already put the filter disc inside the chamber as well. One big thing I want to touch on really quick is the filter disc themselves. Is sometimes there's going to be three different papers that come in the filter disc. They do have to be inserted into the support chamber a certain way. So just getting the disc, putting it in there, there's an inlet side and an outlet side. So think of your sheet filter, just like you have the rough side, the clean side, inlet side, dirty side. And I have the disc set out up here. So after the presentation, you guys are welcome to walk up and take a look. Just don't touch, just take a look. Cool. How do I get to that? So what we did, these are just a test that was done prior, no name on it. So don't try to look too hard to see what winery this is from. It's just a sample. If you're looking at the results, the nice thing about this unit is it's going to calculate everything for you. It's an automated unit, so you don't have to. A lot of you guys, depending on the style, what technology you're using, you have to stand in front of the unit, you have to time it, you have to record those times and seconds, and then you have to calculate it. A lot of that takes time, right? Nice thing about this is going to allow you to basically input all your information into the document, press start, walk away. If you're running multiple samples in a day, this would probably be something that would spark interest to you. We typically say if you're running more than 10, 15 samples, then you're probably going to be more interested in this rather than the manual one. Right here, what I want you guys to focus on is the bottom, my right corner where you see the FI, MFI, and VMAX. That's telling us that our FI is at 4. My eyes are horrible. I think that's 4.489. Modified is 4.92. If we had a number like that, I would feel very confident saying, send that wine to bottle. They're going to be bottling for a long time, and the crew's going to be happy because they're going to probably be bottling at a low pressure drop. So very good number. You see what this gives you is the chart on the top and the bottom. So as the test is done, you see that wall, right when that chart, the very first, it looks like a wall. That's the wine finding its way through the path of the filter itself. And then as that wine finds its way through the path of the filter, it levels itself out. So that's what you want to see. If you're running filterability, you see that line kind of going up and down. That tells us that the wine is having some issues trying to get through the filters, or something's restricting it. Maybe it's that colloidal load, maybe it's suspended solids, it's something. So you do want to see a nice level line. So beautiful numbers. That's a very beautiful test right there. This is another one. So I wanted to just kind of show you guys a couple different test results. This one, FI is at 5, modified is at 3, Vmax. I don't look at Vmax. Again, there's so many things that could cause, if you're going off Vmax, there's things in the cellar that could, prevent you from getting the throughput that Vmax might tell you that you're going to get. Maybe somebody didn't clean the pump, maybe there's dirty hose, so many things that could happen. In this case, FI is 5, that's great, but modified is lower than the initial FI. So what that tells us is that wine, that day one, is still a good filterability value, but it's going to take that wine a little bit of time to find its way its way through the filters, right? And once it finds its way through the filters, it's going to level itself out. With modified meat low, I would expect that wine to bottle for long periods of time. So maybe you're bottling a wine, it's taking you multiple days, multiple weeks. I still encourage you to test filterability daily, but if your modified is lower than your initial FI, that's a great sign that you're going to be able to bottle. This one, you'll notice, so FI 39, modified 71, and Vmax is low, because that's basically telling us that that wine probably wasn't bottle ready. It could have been filtered, but maybe it sat in tank. Maybe it got cross-flowed. It sat in tank for 2 weeks before you were able to bottle it. This is a wine or a result where I would, if I'm winemaker, I'd probably say, hey, seller, we got to refilter this one, because this is definitely going to clog our filters. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be changing out cartridges prematurely because the wine was just not ready to go through the filters. And all this is basically it's telling us, it's preventing us from just sending that wine to the bottling line and, being frustrated. So these are a couple different tests that we've done. I'm going to now do the demonstration, and yeah, that's it.